Welcome to the Flynn Effect podcast, where we dive deep into all things culture, industry news, and history, all with the goal of helping our clients to perform better.
Well, we're back again for another podcast with Michelle Furibondo, our Director of CX and Research.
So Thanks for having me back.
Yes, you did such a good job the first time with Katie that I was jealous. I had to interview you myself.
Mm-hmm.
So today you're here. We want to talk a lot about synthetic audiences, which is a hot topic. We've done a lot with AI lately, and I feel like this podcast, just one episode isn't complete without talking about AI. So we're going to do an entire episode on AI today. So can you tell us a little bit about what are synthetic audiences and how are you using them today?
So ultimately, a synthetic audience is just an AI representation of your audience.
Mm-hmm.
So you can feed it whatever kind of data you have. If you have real customer data, survey data, or just general census data, and narrow in on the audience that you want to target, whether for yourself, for your clients, whoever you're trying to understand. And then it's an AI model that runs and predicts behaviors, predicts answers, feelings of what your audience might think. So you can run it, concept testing through it, whether it's creative or a product idea. And that's typically how we use it today, is running creative through it to see, if we're comparing two different sets of copy or two different images, what does our audience think about them? Which one do they like better? Which one might drive action, whatever that action might be.
Great. And how do you do a lot with focus groups and individual interviews for our clients. So how do you fit this into your research booklet? Like, where does this synthetic audience research fit? Does it replace what you're doing? Does it pull research in sooner? What are you seeing?
Yeah, it's more of an augmentation to our process. So nothing will ever replace actually talking to humans.
Yeah.
They're the ones that have the unique ideas, the unique perceptions, but the synthetic audiences is a chance to test things sooner and earlier and allow for more iteration throughout the process. So it's super quick. It could take 5 minutes to ask your audience a question, depending on how robust your question guide is. But what we really try to do is do it early and often so we can iterate on those different concepts. And then ultimately, in the ideal world, then you would test those final concepts with humans.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I know we've been doing this already for some of our clients. And have you had any instances where you have run concepts through synthetic audiences and then spoke with humans and gotten totally different feedback? Are you finding that the synthetic audiences are relatively accurate?
Yeah, I would say they're pretty close. In some cases, they may not be as in-depth, but for the most part, they're aligned on the direction. So whether it's positive or negative, they might call out the same pain points or challenges that they're seeing with the concept that we're presenting. It may just not be as specific, but at least the synthetic audience gives us something to react to so we can kind of bulletproof those concepts before we get to the human part.
Great. And I know there's a lot of different ways to build these synthetic audiences, and we know you're heading up AI here at our agency and building out a lot of agents for us. So how often do you need to refresh the synthetic audiences you're building, and how often do you feed them data? Or is that automatically done? How do these audiences learn over time for you?
Ideally, you're refreshing them as soon as you have new data that's relevant. It really depends on what you're testing and, the kind of topic areas. So if there's nothing that's changed in the industry that you're looking at, there's not a huge need to refresh it because it's really about the perceptions and the demographics of that audience. But anytime you get new data that you think is relevant, push it right in. So then they can just be more refined and, a little more like real world scenarios. But I would say you can do something as easy as a really descriptive prompt if you don't have an agent or a synthetic audience tool, just to get your AI tool in the mindset of the persona you're trying to target. or you could go as in depth as a third party or first party tool that you're creating that uses, robust data sets to model out your audience.
Right. So I'll throw you a curveball here, a question that just came
Okay.
to mind. Is we speak a lot about how AI, when it's doing research, is not accurate and how it spits out, we've tried to use it for competitive research. It's not doesn't give us the right data. We find that we still need to do that in a very hands-on human way.
Mm-hmm.
So what is it that's making these synthetic audiences so accurate, and how are they able to reflect on the industry better than when we are trying to build out some of this other data that we find inaccuracies in?
That is a tough one. I
There
think,
may not be a real answer to it, but I know, I ask because we're seeing a lot of really valuable data, and we're finding that these synthetic audiences report back very similarly to humans. So I'm always intrigued on why,
mm-hmm.
generative AI cannot figure out all the questions I ask it.
Yeah. Well, I'm not going to pretend that I know all the
Yeah.
inner workings of it, but um, my assumption is that when you're looking for something that's out there, it's doing, I don't know, an enhanced Google search or
Yeah.
something. So it's looking for stats and data that exists out in the internet. When you're using your audience, it's really looking at your panel with all the demographics and psychographics that you feed into it. So it's not having to find information that exists somewhere.
Mm-hmm.
It's actually using the model to simulate the behavior of the data that it's looking at. So it's a little more narrow data set. Of
Mm-hmm.
course, if you have it structured so that it is also using the internet, you
Yeah.
may run into some of those issues too. But I think it's a lot more narrow in scope. And since it's
Mm-hmm.
behaving based on the personas that you fed it, it's really just using those models to give you the answers you're looking for.
Right. So it really comes down to it's as accurate as the work you're putting into building it. So
Exactly.
great. Anything else that you want to talk about? I think you answered a lot of my curiosity about how we're using it today. And um, any thoughts?
Um, just a couple, I guess, guardrails or things to
Mm-hmm.
watch out for, because having AI so accessible to everyone, you don't have to be a seasoned researcher to use it, but you have to understand some of the research methodologies.
Mm-hmm.
So if you do go out and use a synthetic audience, just make sure your questions are as objective as possible. You're not
Mm-hmm.
leading your
Mm-hmm.
panel, a certain
Yeah.
way based on how you ask the question. And also, we all know AI are, you know, they aim to please. They
Mm-hmm.
have that positivity bias, and everything that you say, you're like, oh, that's great. That's
Mm-hmm.
wonderful. But you really need to be prescriptive in telling it to be brutally honest,
Mm-hmm.
because especially when you're using it to pressure test something, you don't want it to tell you it's great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
You
Yeah.
want it to find the flaws. So just
Mm-hmm.
making sure you really are prescriptive and specific when you tell it what kind of feedback to
Yeah.
give you.
That's a great point, because we're not using it just to tell us how great we are, or to um take what we've put in and simply add to it or amplify it. I know I asked it to be brutally honest about some creative recently, and I was like, ouch. I thought it was pretty good. So I think that that's a place too where we want to find that middle ground of, we don't want it to be really telling us that everything we put in is amazing, but sometimes the brutal honesty is good to hear, but we need to find that middle ground,
Mm-hmm.
so we don't just kill concepts that our human brains actually liked,
Yeah.
by having the platforms
Yeah.
tell us everything that's wrong with it, because you'll easily kill all your little darlings.
And that's where, using your
Mm-hmm.
expertise comes into play. So it might say that it hates a word you're using, but you have to have that word in there for whatever
Yeah.
reason. So take it with a grain of salt, test it with real
Mm-hmm.
humans. Um, use your human brain, like you
Yeah.
said, to like really check that it's something logical. Um, but yeah, it's
Awesome.
easy. to have fun with, especially because, you can keep probing, you can keep asking questions. In your focus groups, you can have them interact with each other. You could go in a one-on-one interview, and it's just, it feels like you're talking to a real person.
Yeah.
It's always got that little tinge of AI speak
Mhm.
when it gives you its answers, but once you look through that, it has a lot of good, valuable data.
Great. Well, I'm really interested to see where you take this and what you're able to build, and what uses we find for this and continue to use in the future.
Yeah, I'm excited.
Great. Well, thank you for joining us today and coming back. We'll have to have you back for a third time soon here before Katie returns.
All right, thanks for having me.